Mr. Alexander, don't drink that. Her fiancé put something in the glass. Keisha Washington's scream cut through the elegant silence of the main hall like thunder on a clear day. 50 guests in tuxedos and designer gowns froze instantly. Alexander Sterling, a 42-year-old billionaire, stopped with a glass of Dom Perignon champagne inches from her lips. Victoria Blackwood, her perfect fiancée, turned pale as if she had seen a ghost. The 35-year-old cleaning lady stood at the entrance to the hall, still holding the cleaning bucket, shaking like a leaf, but her eyes fixed on the golden glass sparkling under the crystal chandeliers. "What did you say?" Alexander slowly lowered the glass, her deep voice echoing through the marble and mahogany room. Victoria reacted first, jumping out of her chair with studied elegance. "Darling, pay no attention to this person. Her has clearly lost her mind. Security." Her voice sounded firm, but Keisha noticed the almost imperceptible tremor in her perfectly manicured hands. The silence was so heavy that you could hear the discreet clinking of silver cutlery being abandoned by the shocked guests. Some whispered indignantly about the audacity of a mere employee interrupting the most important business dinner of the year. Keisha took a deep breath. She had spent 12 years cleaning the mansions of Manhattan's elite, always invisible, always ignored. But in recent weeks, her ears had picked up fragments of conversations that made his blood run cold. Whispered phone calls, secret meetings in the office, strange bottles appearing and disappearing from the kitchen. "I saw her tampering with her glass, sir," Keisha said, her voice firmer now. "And I found strange things hidden in her room." Victoria let out a crystalline laugh, but his eyes shot invisible daggers at the cleaning lady. "Alexander, love, this woman clearly has mental problems. Maybe it's time we reviewed our hiring criteria." 2 security guards approached Keisha, but Alexander raised his hand, stopping them. His piercing blue eyes alternated between the fiancée he had loved for 3 years and the employee who had just made an impossible accusation. What no one in that room knew was that Keisha Washington was not just an ordinary cleaning lady. With a degree in chemistry from Howard University, she had been forced to abandon her career after a false accusation of theft at her previous laboratory. Now, working in the shadows, his scientific knowledge finally found a purpose that she had never imagined. For a moment that seemed like an eternity, the fate of 3 lives hung in the air like smoke. Alexander looked back at the glass, then at Victoria, then at Keisha. The cleaning lady who had always been treated like furniture was now at the center of a drama that would make headlines across the country. "Please, sir," Keisha whispered, tears glistening in her eyes, but unwavering determination in her posture. "Just don't drink it." And in that instant, Alexander Sterling realized that his luxurious life, built on million-dollar contracts and strategic alliances, was about to collapse in a way that even her best lawyers could not have predicted. The question echoing in her mind was simple and terrifying. Could it be possible that the woman he loved was trying to kill him? What would happen in the next few minutes would determine not only who would live or die, but which version of the truth would prevail in that silent war between 2 women from completely opposite worlds. If you're wondering how a simple cleaning lady had the courage to take on New York's most powerful elite, subscribe to the channel, because this story of justice is just beginning. The silence in the hall was deafening. 50 of New York's most powerful businessmen watched the scene as if they were watching a thriller, not knowing whether to laugh at the absurd situation or call his lawyers. Victoria Blackwood laughed again, this time louder, turning to the guests like an experienced actress controlling her audience. "Look at this ridiculous situation. A cleaning lady trying to ruin the most important moment of our lives with delusional fantasies." Alexander still held his glass, but his piercing eyes studied Keisha intensely. "What kind of strange things did you find?" His voice was calculated, revealing neither belief nor doubt. "Small bottles hidden in her bathroom cabinet," Keisha replied, ignoring the hostile looks around her. "Liquids that are neither perfume nor medicine. And she was on the phone yesterday, talking about solving the Alexander problem once and for all." Victoria paled for a split second before regaining her composure. How absurd. Alexander, dear her, a woman, is clearly making up stories to get attention. Perhaps she has undiagnosed mental health issues. The comment about mental problems hit Keisha like a stab in the back. 12 years earlier, when she worked at a prestigious pharmaceutical laboratory in Boston, his supervisors had used exactly the same words to disqualify her findings about irregularities in new drug trials. "Maybe you're seeing things, Keisha. Maybe you need professional help." 2 weeks later, $500,000 worth of research materials had disappeared from the lab. Keisha was accused of theft, summarily fired, and blacklisted in the pharmaceutical industry. Her scientific career had ended before it had even truly begun. "I'm not crazy," Keisha said, her voice rising in intensity. "And I recognize chemical compounds when I see them. I've been cleaning rich people's houses for 12 years, and I've learned that you always underestimate those you consider inferior." The comment caused an indignant murmur among the guests. "How dare she insult us?" whispered one socialite to her table neighbor. Victoria took advantage of the guests' hostile reaction. "Do you see? This woman clearly has deep resentment towards successful people. Alexander, honey, call security now, before she does something really dangerous." "Keisha," he said, using his first name for the first time in 12 years of working together. "Are you absolutely sure about what you're saying?" The question carried immense weight. Keisha knew that her answer would determine not only the fate of that evening, but possibly the rest of her life. If she was wrong, he would be sued, arrested, destroyed forever. If she was right but couldn't prove it. "I am Mr. Sterling," she replied firmly. "And I can prove it." Victoria let out a hysterical laugh. "Prove it? How? With what evidence? Do you really believe that a simple cleaning lady—" She didn't finish the sentence, but the contempt in her voice was crystal clear. It was at that moment that Keisha noticed something that no one else had noticed. Victoria was sweating discreetly, despite the powerful air conditioning in the room. Her hands, always perfectly controlled, trembled slightly as she held the glass of water. More importantly, she had not specifically denied having the vials. "Mr. Sterling," Keisha said calmly, Ms. Victoria did not deny having the vials. "She only said that my allegations are absurd." Silence once again filled the room. All eyes turned to Victoria, waiting for a direct and categorical denial. Victoria hesitated for 2 seconds. Just 2 seconds, but it was enough time for Alexander to notice. "Of course I deny it," she finally exclaimed. "What a ridiculous question." But the hesitation had already been noticed by several people. Mr. Patterson, a real estate mogul and close friend of Alexander's, leaned over to whisper something in her ear. Keisha took a deep breath. For years, she had observed powerful people in their most vulnerable moments, cleaning their homes while they believed they were alone. She had learned to read body language, to identify lies, to sense when someone was hiding secrets. Most importantly, she had learned that the powerful always underestimated those they considered invisible. "May I suggest something, Mr. Sterling?" Keisha said, her voice now carrying a confidence that surprised everyone. "How about we ask someone to go up to Mrs. Victoria's room and check the bathroom cabinet? Bottom drawer, right side, behind the imported hair products." The specificity of the location made Alexander raise his eyebrows. Victoria, for her part, was visibly disturbed. That's invasion of privacy. I won't allow an employee to dictate the rules of my own home." "It's not his home yet," Alexander said coldly. "And if Keisha is lying, it will be easy to prove. If she is telling the truth," he left the sentence hanging, laden with menace. At that moment, Keisha Washington knew she had crossed a line of no return. But unlike 12 years ago, when she had been a naive young scientist, she was now prepared for the war that would follow. Because during all those years cleaning houses, watching, being treated like furniture, she had learned something Victoria Blackwood would never understand. Sometimes, being underestimated is the greatest advantage anyone can have. And while Victoria wasted her energy trying to humiliate her publicly, Keisha kept her most powerful card hidden, a 23-minute recording that would turn that night into a nightmare that Victoria would never forget. The tension in the hall was palpable. Victoria tried to regain control of the situation, walking gracefully among the guests like a queen defending her territory. "Just look at the absurd situation we find ourselves in," she said, gesturing theatrically. "A domestic worker trying to teach chemistry lessons to people who have built empires." The guests' nervous laughter echoed through the room. Mr. Patterson whispered to her, "How embarrassing for Alexander. How can he allow a maid to cause such a scandal?" Alexander remained motionless, studying both women. Her business mind, trained to detect lies in million-dollar negotiations, picked up contradictory signals. Victoria was sweating more than usual. Keisha, on the other hand, remained disconcertingly calm for someone who had just made such a serious accusation. Mr. Sterling, Keisha said calmly, may I ask Mrs. Victoria a simple question? Absolutely not. Victoria exclaimed before Alexander could respond. I will not submit to questioning by a maid. The vehement refusal caught the attention of several guests. Why would Victoria fear simple questions if she had nothing to hide? Keisha took a deep breath. During 12 years of cleaning mansions, she had learned that powerful people always made the same mistake. They completely underestimated those they considered inferior. Very well. Then let me share what I have discovered over the past 15 days. 15 days. Alexander raised his eyebrows. Yes, sir. That's when I started noticing strange patterns. Keisha walked slowly across the room, ignoring the hostile stares. Phone calls always at the same time, always when you were away. Chemicals appearing and disappearing from the kitchen. And most notably, Mrs. Victoria asking very specific questions about his eating habits. Victoria let out a hysterical laugh. Questions about eating habits? I'm his fiancée. It's natural for me to be interested in her health. It's natural, Keisha agreed. But it's not natural to ask specifically about intolerances to certain chemicals, exact mealtimes, and whether he has a habit of sharing food with other people. The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. He vaguely remembered Victoria, asking exactly those questions, always casually, always disguised as loving care. It was at that moment that something unexpected happened. Dr. Marcus Henderson, a renowned toxicologist and one of the guests present, slowly stood up. Excuse me, but those are exactly the questions a poisoner would ask to calculate precise dosages. Victoria paled. Dr. Henderson, you can't be serious. Actually, he continued, adjusting his glasses, I am very interested in the chemical knowledge demonstrated by, he looked at Keisha. What was his name again? Keisha Washington, doctor. And thank you for asking his name. Most people here never bother. Alexander watched the interaction with growing fascination. There was something about Keisha's demeanor that didn't fit with a simple cleaning lady. The way she used scientific terminology, how she maintained direct eye contact, how she remained calm under intense pressure. Dr. Henderson approached Keisha. You mentioned recognizing chemical compounds. What kind of training do you have? Victoria tried to interrupt. Doctor, please, let's not give any more attention to this. Chemistry, Keisha replied simply. Howard University, class of 2007. I worked in a pharmaceutical lab for 3 years before, her hesitated. Before certain circumstances forced me to change careers. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. A trained chemist working as a cleaning lady? The story didn't add up, and everyone could tell. Alexander stepped forward. What kind of circumstances? I was falsely accused of theft when I discovered irregularities in drug testing, Keisha said, her voice heavy with old pain. My scientific career ended overnight. I was blacklisted from the industry. Dr. Henderson nodded gravely. I know these cases well. The pharmaceutical industry does not tolerate whistleblowers. He turned to Alexander. Mr. Sterling, if I may suggest, perhaps we should hear what Dr. Washington has to say. Dr. Washington, Alexander repeated, testing the words. Do you have a doctorate? Master's degree in analytical chemistry, specializing in toxicology, Keisha replied. I spent 12 years cleaning houses because it was the only work I could get. But I never stopped being a scientist. Victoria was visibly panicked. This is ridiculous. You're going to believe stories made up by a... By a what? Dr. Henderson interrupted her coldly. By a qualified scientist who is making observations based on evidence? Keisha seized the moment. Mr. Sterling, her Victoria didn't just ask suspicious questions. She also received mysterious deliveries. Always when you were traveling. Always delivered by men in unmarked cars. That's a lie. Victoria shouted. Last Wednesday, October 16th, at 3:15 p.m., Keisha continued calmly. Caucasian man, approximately 40 years old, driving a black sedan, license plate partially covered. Delivery made at the back entrance. Length of meeting, 27 minutes. The specificity of the details made Alexander mentally recoil. Either Keisha was making it all up with impressive creativity, or she had actually been observing and documenting. "How do you know all this?" Alexander asked. "Because after 12 years of being treated as invisible, I've learned that powerful people do questionable things when they believe no one is watching." Keisha looked directly at Victoria. "And because for the past 15 days, I've been documenting everything." Victoria tried one last gambit. "Alexander, dear, are you going to allow a resentful maid to destroy our relationship with paranoid fantasies?" But Alexander was no longer looking at Victoria. His eyes were fixed on Keisha, and there was a new expression on his face: respect. "What kind of documentation?" Keisha smiled for the first time that evening. It wasn't a smile of joy, but of someone who could finally reveal carefully guarded cards. "Photographs. Audio recordings. Chemical analyses of the vials I found. And most importantly," she paused dramatically, "a 23-minute recording of a very enlightening phone conversation." Victoria's blood seemed to freeze in her veins. "What recording?" "The one from last Sunday, when you were playing golf," Keisha replied calmly. "When you spoke to someone named Tony about speeding up the schedule and making sure nothing was left for further investigation." Victoria staggered as if she had been physically punched. Several guests looked at each other, beginning to understand the real gravity of the situation. Dr. Henderson approached Alexander. "Mr. Sterling, I strongly suggest you don't drink anything until we have completely clarified this situation." Alexander nodded, placing his glass firmly on the table. "Keisha," he said, using his first name for the second time, "where is this evidence?" "In a safe place," she replied. "And copies have already been sent to trusted individuals, in case anything happens to me." It was at that moment that Victoria Blackwood realized she had completely underestimated her opponent. The simple cleaning lady was in fact a trained scientist, a meticulous investigator, and a strategist who had spent 15 days gathering irrefutable evidence. While Victoria desperately tried to think of a way out, Keisha remained calm, knowing that her most powerful card had not yet been revealed. Because the 23-minute recording didn't just show Victoria conspiring, it showed something much worse, something that would turn that night into a nightmare Victoria could never have imagined. What no one in that room yet suspected was that Keisha Washington wasn't just defending Alexander Sterling's life. She was about to expose a web of corruption that reached far beyond that mansion, a conspiracy that would involve names that would make headlines for months. And it would all start with a simple question she was about to ask, a question that would make Victoria publicly confess to crimes that her herself didn't even know she had committed. The silence in the room was so thick it seemed physical. Victoria was visibly shaking, her perfectly manicured hands now damp with cold sweat. The mention of the recording with Tony had completely destroyed her composure. "What recording?" Alexander repeated, his voice low but laden with an authority that made everyone present lean forward. Keisha took a deep breath, knowing that the next few minutes would determine not only the fate of that evening, but possibly the rest of her life. "Mr. Sterling, during 12 years of cleaning the homes of the elite, I have learned that powerful people commit their worst crimes when they believe they are alone." Victoria tried one last desperate gambit. "Alexander, you can't be taking this seriously. She's a disgruntled employee trying to—" "Shut up, Victoria," Alexander said coldly, without taking his eyes off his wife. "Continue." Keisha took a small digital recorder out of her apron pocket. "Last Sunday, October 21st, 3:17 p.m. Ms. Victoria was in her office, door closed, talking to someone named Antonio Rossetti." The name caused several guests to look at each other. Antonio Rossetti was known in business circles as a problem solver, a man who made things disappear for substantial sums of money. "I've never heard of this man," Victoria lied desperately, but her voice faltered on the last word. Dr. Henderson approached. "May I examine that tape recorder?" Keisha handed the device to the doctor, who plugged in headphones and listened for a few seconds. His expression changed dramatically. "Mr. Sterling, I suggest everyone listen to this." Alexander nodded, and Keisha connected the recorder to a portable sound system she had brought with her. Victoria's clear voice filled the room. "Tony, I need you to speed up the schedule. Alexander is getting suspicious about the funds I transferred to the Cayman Islands. Yes, I know it's risky, but if he finds out about the 12 million, I'm done for. No, he can't just disappear. It has to look natural. A heart attack, perhaps. Did you make sure the substance leaves no trace? The room exploded with exclamations of shock. Some guests stood up abruptly, others covered their mouths in horror. Alexander turned pale as a sheet. The recording continued, perfect. And after he dies, how long will it take for me to have full access to the assets? Great. Are the fake will documents ready? Excellent. In a week, the entire sterling fortune will be his. Victoria tried to head for the door, but 2 security guards had already positioned themselves strategically. This is a montage, she screamed hysterically. It's digital technology. It can be faked. Keisha smiled for the first time with genuine satisfaction. Interesting that you mentioned digital technology. She took a tablet out of the cleaning bucket. Because I also have this. High-resolution photographs appeared on the screen, Victoria receiving a middle-aged man at the back entrance of the mansion. Clear timestamps showed dates and times. In one of the photos, Victoria was handing over an envelope clearly filled with cash. This is Antonio Rossetti, Keisha explained calmly. Also known as Tony, in New York criminal circles. Specialist in deaths that look natural. Dr. Henderson examined the photos with a grave expression. Mr. Sterling, as a physician, I must inform you that some modern compounds can indeed simulate heart attacks without leaving detectable traces in conventional autopsies. Alexander rose slowly, her posture emanating a controlled fury that made even the security guards recoil slightly. Victoria, he said, her voice so cold it seemed to lower the temperature in the room. You stole $12 million from my businesses. I can explain, Victoria began, but Alexander cut her off. And you hired a professional assassin to kill me. It's not what it looks like. To keep a fortune you never helped build. Victoria finally broke down. The tears she shed were not of regret, but of rage at having been discovered. You don't understand, she cried. 3 years pretending to love you. 3 years putting up with his boring business, his stupid meetings, his arrogant friends. I deserved that fortune. The room fell completely silent. The full confession had been made in front of 50 witnesses from New York's elite. Keisha said nothing. She just watched with quiet dignity as Victoria publicly destroyed herself. Alexander took out his cell phone and dialed 911. Police, please. I have an attempted murder to report, as well as theft of substantial valuables. He looked directly at Victoria. The suspect is here with me. It was at that moment that Victoria realized the magnitude of her situation. Not only had she lost the fortune she coveted, but she had confessed to attempted murder in front of dozens of influential witnesses. Her carefully cultivated social connections evaporated instantly. Mr. Patterson stood up, visibly disturbed. Alexander, my wife and I are going to leave. This is unacceptable. Other guests began to stand up as well, clearly wanting distance from the situation. While they waited for the police, Alexander approached Keisha. Dr. Washington, he said, using his title for the first time. You saved my life. I just did what was right, she replied simply. No, Alexander shook his head. You did much more than that. You showed me that I've spent years being blind to what really matters. Victoria was sitting in a chair, watched over by security guards, muttering obsessively about how everything had been perfectly planned, and how a simple cleaning lady had ruined everything. Dr. Henderson approached Keisha. Dr. Washington, may I ask why you abandoned chemistry to work as a cleaning lady? I was falsely accused of theft at a pharmaceutical laboratory, she replied. I discovered irregularities in drug testing and was silenced in the cruelest way possible. Alexander listened intently. Which laboratory? Pharmatech Industries. In Boston. Alexander raised his eyebrows. I know the CEO. Robert Morrison has been one of my business contacts for years. He paused significantly. And after what I witnessed today, I'm sure her false accusation wasn't false at all. Police sirens began to echo in the distance. Victoria raised her head, finally understanding that her new reality would be very different from designer dresses and elegant dinners. How? She murmured, looking at Keisha with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. How could a simple scientist, Keisha corrected her calmly. A simple scientist whom you completely underestimated. When the police arrived, they found Victoria Blackwood, until a few hours earlier one of Manhattan's most admired socialites, being arrested for attempted murder and theft of $12 million, while her intended victim watched with a calmness that contrasted sharply with the hysteria of the woman who had almost killed him. What none of the guests present could have imagined was that this night would mark not only the end of Victoria's criminal career, but the beginning of an investigation that would uncover a web of corruption involving pharmaceutical companies, professional assassins, and criminal socialites that would make national headlines for months. And at the center of it all, the woman everyone had treated as invisible would become the star of one of the most talked-about criminal cases of the decade, proving that sometimes justice comes from those we least expect, but who have exactly the right skills to expose the truth at the right moment. 6 months later, Victoria Blackwood traded her designer dresses for an orange prison uniform. Sentenced to 15 years for attempted murder and fraud, she now spent her days cleaning toilets at the Bedford Hills Women's Prison. The irony did not go unnoticed by anyone. The woman who had despised cleaning ladies was now one herself. "Inmate Blackwood," shouted the guard. "Her visit has been cancelled." No one else came to see her. Her former socialite friends treated her as if she had never existed. Meanwhile, Keisha Washington was being interviewed by CNN in her new office as Director of Scientific Investigations at Sterling Enterprises. Alexander had created the position specifically for her, recognizing that her analytical skills were exactly what his company needed. "Dr. Washington," the reporter asked, "how does it feel to be the first black woman in an executive position at Sterling Enterprises?" "I feel like I'm finally where I should have always been," Keisha replied calmly. 12 years of cleaning houses taught me more about human character than any laboratory ever could." The investigation triggered by Victoria's arrest had uncovered a web of corruption that extended to pharmatech industries. Robert Morrison, the CEO who had destroyed Keisha's career years earlier, now faced federal charges. Justice had finally found its way. Alexander had offered Keisha more than a job. He had offered her the chance to completely rebuild her life. In addition to an executive salary, he ensured that all cases similar to her would be investigated by the company, creating a $15 million fund for scientists who had been unfairly persecuted. "You saved me," Alexander said during the press conference announcing Keisha's new position. "But more than that, he taught me that true leadership means listening to voices that others prefer to ignore." Victoria watched the interview on television from prison, observing the woman she had despised now being hailed nationally as a symbol of integrity and perseverance. Her hands trembled when Keisha was asked about forgiveness. "I hold no grudges," Keisha replied with the same calmness she had shown on that fateful night. "People like Victoria destroy themselves. My role was simply to ensure that the truth came to light." At the end of the interview, Keisha looked directly into the camera. To anyone watching who has ever been underestimated, humiliated, or dismissed because of her background, remember, knowledge is power, and power used with integrity always wins out over arrogance based on privilege. 2 years later, Keisha married Alexander in a simple ceremony. Not out of gratitude or convenience, but because they discovered they shared fundamental values about justice and human dignity. Victoria, who had planned to marry him for money, watched the headlines from prison, knowing she had lost not only a fortune, but the chance to know a truly worthy man. The lesson echoed through every headline, every interview, every life transformed by Keisha's example. The person you despise today may be the very one who determines his fate tomorrow. Victoria had learned the hard way that underestimating someone based on prejudice is not only morally wrong, it is strategically suicidal. While Victoria counted the days in her cell, Keisha was building a legacy that would prove that true victory comes not from destroying enemies, but from building something greater than they could ever imagine. Have you ever underestimated someone who later proved to be stronger than you thought? Leave her experience in the comments and subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that justice, even when delayed, always finds its way.